so let's make a little fishing pond to go into our quiet book. So the first thing I like to do with every room is to just kind of lay it out and get a feel for how I want it to look in the end. So I've picked different fabrics for each of my little pond levels. And I decided on 5 little fishes. And I wanted 3 of them in this lower, the shallow pool, and 2 of them in the deeper pool. So I've cut my ribbons accordingly. The deeper ones get 8-inch ribbons and the shallow ones get the 5-inch ribbons. So I am ready to start constructing. And the first step with each of the rooms is going to just be to baste that batting to the back of the room. So I'm just going to pin this in place and baste all the way around the outside. And that'll be the first step for any of the room options that you decide to make today. Okay, so we have our batting basted to our yard, I guess, the room. And just gave that a really good press just to make sure that it's nice and flat and easy to work with. And we're actually just going to set this aside. And the next step in making our little pond is actually to sew our little fishies. So what we do with the fishes is you have 2 fish cut out. I chose a contrasting color for each of them just because I thought it was kind of fun. You can obviously choose whatever you like. And then the corresponding ribbon, so this fish is going to go in the deeper pond. So I have an 8-inch ribbon. And you just go ahead and place that ribbon right in the middle of the tail in between those 2 layers. You could certainly add some batting in the middle of this to make it a little squishy, a little fun for your little one. You can totally have lots of fun with it and personalize it. So we're just going to pin that in place. And I'm going to throw one more pin up here because the first step is going to be to sew all the way around the outside of the fish, but then also we want to make sure to sew a little bit extra over the ribbon so that as your child is playing with it, it's nice and secure right there. And you could add some details to the tail or add a little fin or a little face, whatever you'd like to do to personalize it for your little one. So we're going to take that straight to the machine and sew all of those details that you want to add in there, at the very least just around the outside with a little extra security over that tail for any fish that you want to add to your pond. So these are all ready to go, so I'm going to set these aside for now. And we are going to start constructing our pond. So we're going to bring our background back out. And then the big pond piece is the first thing that gets attached. So I'm just going to put that on here wherever I want it to be. If you want your pond to be at an angle, put it at an angle. Wherever you want it to be, we're just going to lay it flat and put a couple of pins around it, because the first thing we're going to do is just stitch all the way around that outside edge and make sure that it's nice and secure. And ready for swimming. So that is all ready for me to top stitch. I'm just going to top stitch right around all the way around the edge and come back and we'll work on the next piece. Okay, so we've got our big pond piece in place and we're just going to set this aside for now while we prep our other pond pieces. So you're just going to take your set of pond piece 2 and you just want to put them right sides together along that top edge and throw some pins along the top, because what we're going to do is we're going to stitch that top edge and turn it so that it's right sides out once again, and then we'll have a beautifully finished top edge for our fishes to go swimming. So that is pond piece 2. If you are also a batch sewer, you can do the same preparation to pond piece 1. So this is the 2 pieces, right sides together, just pinned along the top. So I'm just going to take those to the machine and get them sewn along the top and give it a really good press. Okay, so we've got, I realize this blue side is hard to see. Let's flip this over. We have these sewn right sides together, and I give it a really good press so that I'm really sure those stitches are nice and secure. And then we just need to clip into that seam allowance. So clipping into the seam allowance allows these curves to turn right sides out very beautifully. And to do that, I've already done it here, but I just want to make sure you want to get in there just with the tip of your scissors. You really want to make sure to just use the tip. If you're in here with this, you're so likely to be startled or accidentally clip all the way through your seam line, and you just want to snip up to but not through that stitch line. So just use the very tip of the scissors, and I like to do it pretty frequently. I do about every 1/4 inch because I really think it gives a nice clean turn. But whatever you want to do for yours works just fine. But that'll give you a nice clean turn of those waves when we're ready to turn it, which is next. So the next step is to turn it right sides out and press it. And what I really like to do is I like to come in here just from this right side and start pressing with the tip of my iron this way. And what that does is it gives me a really clean press right at the stitch line, so that it allows me to, once I've done that, flip that to right sides out and get that stitch line to be right at the top of the fold. So I'm going to do the pressing, and then I'm going to do a little bit of top stitching, but I've already done that with my other pond pieces, so I just wanted to show that to you. So you can see my stitch line is right at the top of the fold, and it's beautiful, it's flat, I've got lovely curves going on here. And I think that first press of getting right in between the two layers really helps create that beautiful smooth curve that we're looking for. So I'm going to do that with pond piece 2 and do the top stitching, and then we'll come back and finish constructing the pond. Okay, so we have our pond pieces all ready to go to attach to our pond. So we're going to pull out our background one more time. And the first thing we need to do is actually grab the fish that you sewed. If you're adding them, the fish are completely optional. But if you're adding them, you want the fish with the long ribbons, and you want to decide where you want to put those. So I'm going to put them kind of at opposite sides, at angles, so that it is really maximizing the 8 inches that we gave on the ribbon there. I want to pin this in place. And you just want to make sure that you're over that seam line. You can always trim off a little bit extra here, but you do want to make sure to thoroughly catch this with your stitches. So you do want to make sure it's in the seam line. It's covering the seam line. So those are nice and pinned in place, and so you can take that to the machine and baste it. Or if you're a rebel, what you can do is actually pin the second pond piece right over the top. So you're going to line that up along the bottom. You want to make sure that it's lined up pretty well with pond piece number 1. I like to pull mine down just a little bit because I'd rather have a little bit extra on the edges here and fully cover that bottom so you can't see it too much. And then we're just going to add some pins in right here, and we'll take that to the machine and stitch that in place. Now we do need to be extra careful as we're stitching over the ribbons from the fish, because we want to stitch over that a couple of times, and we have a kind of hidden pin here. So if you're using this technique, do make sure to be careful of the pin, but also to sew over that ribbon just a couple times like we did with the fish end of the ribbon. So you just want to make sure that the ribbon is nice and secure, and also that you don't hurt yourself on your pins. That's very important. So we're going to take that to the machine and just top stitch around this section of pond, just like we did with that first section, just being careful of pins and making sure to catch that ribbon a couple of times with stitch lines. So we have our first set of fishes in and our second pond piece in. And we're just going to do exactly the same thing for the last pond piece. So we're just going to place our fishes wherever we'd like them. And once again, you can definitely go in and baste these in place. I am going to play it risky and loose and just pin them in place and then stitch the second pond piece on top. So I'm going to turn this a little bit so it's a little easier. You are pinning through quite a few layers here, so it might be helpful to switch from smaller pins to more quilting style pins if you have them. You could also use something like Wonder Tape to keep these in place at this point. Something like that might be a little bit easier to use and to work with for you, depending on what you're familiar with and comfortable with. But I've got those pinned in place. And my fish look so beautiful together. I'm very pleased with how they turned out. And then I'm just going to come down here and pin my third pond pleat piece in place. That is a tongue twister if I have ever heard one. Pond piece in place. So I like to let things move a little bit as I'm sewing them for this type of project. So I'm going to just lightly pin. And just a word of caution as you take this to your machine, do remember that this is quite a few layers of fabric now. We've got batting plus 2, 4, 5, 6 layers of fabric plus wherever your ribbon is to sew through. So do be careful and take it slow. Switch to a heavy duty or denim needle if you need to, but we're just going to come through and stitch just that lower pond piece in place, taking care to watch for these pins that are on the ribbons. And also sewing over those ribbons just a couple of extra times to make sure that they're nice and secure so your little ones can play with fish as much as they would like. Okay, so that's it. I gave it a really beautiful press at the end and all of my fishes are secure and ready for some play. You can certainly add some beautiful embroidery, maybe a cute little bee flying across the top, use some puffy paint. Vinyl, whatever you want, just to personalize the rest of the page if you want. I really like this beautiful fabric that I picked for the background. I think it looks like the perfect beside the pond greenery. So I'm going to leave mine just like this, and my pond is complete and ready for construction. Thanks for joining me for the pond piece today. I hope you're enjoying the sew along. So we are ready to sew up our tent. I am super excited about this piece. I think it's going to be really fun. So I have my batting already attached to my sky, I guess, for this room. And then I've laid out all of my pieces just to make sure that I really like how everything is looking. And I gotta say I do. I very much do. I think it's really cute and I'm pretty excited for how this one is coming together. So I am going to start us off a little bit different than usual, because normally I just go with the base pieces of what needs to be done. But in this case, I'm actually going to do the press and top stitch pieces that need to happen. Just because I think that one's just a little bit easier to get done now. So for this one, we have the blanket piece, just like we did in the bedroom if you did that piece. And we're just going to press this top edge a 1/2 inch to the wrong side. And then top stitch close to that raw edge. And we're going to do the same thing along the front of the tent. We're going to do the exact same thing to this front edge here. We're just going to fold it back by a 1/2 inch and top stitch close to that raw edge. So I'm going to take it to the iron first, and I will be right back. Okay, so I have these beautifully pressed. You can see I've got this 1/2 inch to the wrong side for all 3 of these edges. And you will see a point where fabric is overhanging at the tip of those tent flaps, and that's exactly how it should be for now. We're going to top stitch that and then we'll trim that off after we top stitch. So I'm going to take these to the machine and do my top stitching. Okay, so we are all set and top stitched and pressed. I have already clipped this corner, but I'm just going to come in here and just cut straight along that raw edge and create a nice beautiful tip at the top. And these 3 pieces are ready for the next step. So let's set them aside and bring our tent back out. So this is our main background. We have our moon and the tent back, and then the back of our sleeping bag. And so normally I would say you need to take this piece off and sew the tent down, and then you can put this piece back on top. But I'm looking at it and I'm saying my seam allowances are open here. So I'm going to save myself, honestly, just the trip to the back and forth between pins and the machine. And I'm going to sew my tent piece down and the top of my sleeping bag and my moon at the same time. So I really like batch sewing. So I'm going to, these are all secured down now. I'm going to take it to my machine and sew all the way around my tent piece. And then I'm going to sew all the way around the base of my sleeping bag and all the way around my moon. Give it a really good press, and then I'll come back and we will see what is next. So we have our tent secured, the back of our tent and the back of our sleeping bag secured, and our moon in place. So we are ready for the next step. So I'm going to align just like we did with the bed, the front of the sleeping bag, just on top of the back of the sleeping bag. And we're just going to sew down the two sides and the back. You want to leave that top open so their little dolly can fit in the top. And then also, because I like to batch sew and these ones won't interfere with each other, I'm going to line these up along the side edge. And for the tent flaps, you only want to sew up the edges. You don't want to sew along the bottom or along this inside, because you want the tent to be able to open. So you do want to do a couple of extra security stitches at the top and the bottom, just so your little one can play as rough as they like without super worrying about it. I'm just going to put a couple more pins over here, and then I will take these 3 pieces to my machine to sew in place. And I note that the flaps right now are covering up the other thing that I'm going to sew, but they open up nice and out of the way, so I don't have to worry about it. So I can sew these 3 sides, and then just one long seam for each of these tent flap pieces. And then I'll come right back and we will finish off this room. We have our tent all sewn together, and our sleeping bag is finished as well. So I'm actually going to be done with this room, but you could easily add, a little button right here so that you can keep that the tent flaps closed. You could even put a snap just in between the 2 of them if you didn't want another button. You could add some stars to your background if you have little beads or some beautiful paint that you'd like to include there. Pro tip, be sure not to include any stars in the rest of that moon. Something many of us often forget. But that's it. We've got a beautiful little campsite for your little one to play with their dollies, and I am super excited about it. So thanks for joining me for the Doll's House Quiet Book tent page. I hope you're really enjoying this sew along, and I can't wait to see what you've made.